Yay for Monday, everybody, right? See what happens. Okay, sorry, the quiz didn't work. It was not working in my office, so we'll do the quiz on Wednesday. Y'all are ready, it'll be the same thing. I don't know what else is going on. I'm not sure what's going on up here. We'll see how long this manages to work. As you guys can see, it wants to display it up here, but not on my computer. I don't know. It's Monday, everything is shit, right? It's kind of how this is all gonna play out today. So we're gonna talk about skeletal muscle today, or at least we're gonna start talking about skeletal muscle anatomy. Okay. Here's what I want you to do. Everybody, look at your neighbor and point to one of your skeletal muscles. No, you don't have to don't touch your neighbor. No, it's not how it's said. Not at all. Okay. Remember, we don't talk about permission, right? Nope. This is just like pre-K. Don't touch your friends unless they tell you to. It's okay. All right. So try again. Look at your neighbor, point at one of your skeletal muscles on your cell phone, please. Okay. Checking to make sure everybody's pointing. I got a lot of biceps, right? That's pretty good. Chest, okay. Very good. Now, you sort of know what a muscle is or where muscles are. What do we use muscles for? Muscles have one job and one job only. What's their one job? Who said that? Okay, Mason says force. There you go. Mason, what's force?
Creating a movement to overcome what is like antagonizing weight on generating the movement is strong.
Can I generate force and not have movement? Every one of you, it's not like nodding your head or typing or looking on Instagram or whatever it is right now, you're doing that. You're sitting there, you're generating force, but you're not moving. I'm generating force, but I'm not moving. Okay? Why? It's not wrong. We have to have force to have movement. That is in the well, man, I guess that's not 100% true. Right? You go up on a building and you jump, gravity. Okay? But how can I have force but not move? Isometrics. What's an isometric? Okay. I'm standing here, right? Gravity is trying to crush me into the ground at 9.8 meters per second, and therefore I must generate a sufficient or an equal force to all of that to be able to stand up. Okay. If I stop that force, what happens? I fall down, right? It's Mondays, 8:08. We probably all like to generate less force and just lay back down. Okay. So muscles have one job, they generate force. Force is important for a number of reasons, but the primary one is what Mason said. This is what I want you guys to understand. This is why I think we have to talk about muscles first and foremost before anything else that we do. Okay? Without muscles, without force, you can't move. Okay? We cannot move. If we can't move, you can't exercise. Right? You can't run, you can't jump, you can't walk. Right? Nothing happens. Okay? Nothing happens. That's the reason to me that the muscles are the most important thing when it comes around to talk about it. Okay? We're going to go through these structures to some extent today that make skeletal muscle unique in comparison to, say, cardiac muscle or smooth muscle. Okay, which lines your digestive system, which exists around arteries, especially in arterioles, okay? It's still muscle, those muscles, cardiac muscle, if your cardiac muscle didn't contract and generate force, you wouldn't be alive, okay? Smooth muscle, you couldn't move stuff through your intestines. It generates force, but it does it mostly the same. But skeletal muscle is all about movement, okay? It's all about movement. Okay. So, let's do another fun little exercise. Pick on someone. So, pick up. Please. Knew I was going to do it. Well, I'm kind of down, so I got to get a bunch of vanilla folders so you guys can make little nameplates so I can help to learn some of your names. So I know Emily's there. Emily, touch your nose, please. Okay, good. Put your hand down. Hop on one foot. Yes, please. Okay, good. Do a squat. Okay, good. Now stand still. What makes skeletal muscle unique? Thank you. You may sit down. What makes skeletal muscle unique? That let Emily do what I asked her to do. It's voluntary. Very good. What does that mean that it is voluntary? Control. Very good. Okay. Sort of like Simon said, right? Dr. Black says do this. Dr. Black says do that. Okay. Your brain can tell skeletal muscle when to turn on and when to turn off. Okay. Conversely, make your heart stop beating right now. Make it stop. You do it? No. Why? Cardiac muscle is not voluntary, right? Your heart has been beating since, I don't know, you were 3 weeks old or something in your mom's tummy. My developmental biology has escaped me. I don't actually know when that escaped me. But it's been doing that. You never think about it. It always happens. If it doesn't, it's a problem, but it always is happening. Okay? You can do some things to make its rate go up and go down, but you can't make it stop. Okay? Can't do that. That means it's not voluntary. Without voluntary control, you can't run. Okay? You can't walk, you can't do squats, you can't deadlift, whatever it is that you want to do, you're not going to be able to do those kinds of things. Okay? Really, really important thing that makes skeletal muscle unique. Pick somebody else. My man in the gray Columbia shirt. Will you stand up for us? What's your name, bud? Jake. Okay. Here's Jake. Jake, can you just walk down sort of to here and then walk back? Okay. And everybody's looking at Jake. Montana, how many muscles do you think Jake is contracting to be able to walk like this?
A lot.
A lot. Like what's a lot? 3, 4, 100? What's a lot?
Probably like 20, 50.
Okay. Jake, what muscles does it feel like you're using?
Calf muscle, quad, hamstring,
Okay.
maybe my arms a little bit.
Maybe your arms a little bit. Okay, were your arms moving?
Yes,
You're using them, okay? Were you holding an upright posture?
yes.
Okay.
Back muscles.
Back muscles, right? Have I told you guys I've never had anatomy? We talked about this? I've never had class in anatomy, he says, to the group of people that had to take anatomy. I've taught anatomy and physiology. Jake, thank you. Never had anatomy. Okay? They make books, there's Google, you can look shit up, it's fine. Right? So when we do these things, I'm like, I don't know, he's using a back muscle, I don't know which ones they are. Right? He's doing a rectus spinae, something I've heard that before. Something like all of that. Okay? I was a biology major as an undergrad. You know what biology majors don't take? Anatomy. Right? You don't take anatomy. Now you can take comparative vertebrate anatomy. That's what you were going to do if you went to med school. So you learn the anatomy of all these like other animals, like dogs and cats and rats, and anything that's vertebrate. But I parachuted out of I'm going to go to med school before I had to do all of that. And the idea was when you go to med school, they'll teach you anatomy all on your own, right? We make you guys have anatomy. You take it with Cindy, you do great. You go to PT school or PA school or someplace, you go to the health science center, and it's a joke, right? Our undergraduate students that are TAs for us are the TAs for the folks at the health science. So anyway, so you all know more anatomy than I do. At least like muscles and bones and nerves and things like that. My organs and my systems are I'm pretty good because that's really physiology. Okay, that's out of the way. My point with Jake was this, okay? Jake, when did you learn how to walk? You remember? Long time ago, okay? Were you thinking about what you were doing when you were walking? You sure? With everybody watching, we're like, oh God, this or that, I don't want to do these kind of things. No? Okay? You just do it. Right? If I said get up and go run, ride a bike, whatever it might be, you just do it. I can tell you, having a 4.5-year-old at home, sometimes those things are not learned yet. Okay? Your brain is able to make 10, 20, 30, 100 different muscles contract at exactly the right time, at exactly the right amount of force, okay, to generate exactly the movement pattern that we want to let you walk. Not only walk, but we're walking down a hill, okay? There's a slope to that. We'll talk about sort of sensory receptors and things about how we sense muscle length and muscle force and how we interact with the sensory and motor system next week, okay? But we are able to generate precisely the right amount of force at precisely the right time and make all of these little bitty adjustments so that you don't fall down, okay? So that you don't fall down. I'm sure none of you have ever done this. You probably had a friend that's done this. Maybe they went to Campus Corner, maybe they had a little bit too much to drink, right? What does alcohol do to your central nervous system? It depresses it, right? It's an inhibitor. And so people lose balance. They lose their ability to generate the right amount of force at the right amount of time. They lose some of their ability to be able to actually tell, I'm about to step off of all of this. Okay? Some of us have a hard time. We don't need any sort of alcohol or anything to do that. We just have a hard time with those things. Okay? I say all of this to illustrate the point to you all that understanding the structures and the anatomy of skeletal muscle and the central nervous system that connects the brain to skeletal muscle and all of the little individual physiological processes that allow us to control force production and to perceive our external environment and adjust that force production are unbelievably important for our ability to live. Okay? For your ability to do anything. And so we're going to build all of this out starting from an anatomical standpoint. You guys will hopefully understand that structure, the way it's all organized, the anatomy of the neuromuscular system is going to play a key role in imparting how we function. Okay? It's not an accident that muscles look like they do. It's not an accident that the neuromuscular junction looks the way that it does. Okay? It's not an accident that the way that the motor cortex sends sort of neurons down the spinal cord and then axons out of the spinal cord out to connect to your skeletal muscle. It's not an accident that this is what things look like. Okay? If they weren't that way, if we couldn't do the things that we've done, we wouldn't be here. Okay? We would have all been, eaten by a saber-toothed tiger years and years ago, right? Something to that effect. So that's my pitch to you guys on why you should care. You should care because it's important. If your muscles didn't look the way that they did, then this stuff doesn't work. Okay? Questions about that? Are we all right? Are we good? Anybody traumatized because your neighbor touched you? If you have and you'd like to file a report, you may do so. Right. All right, let me see if I can make this advance. So we talked about this, right? We talked about this. Why are muscles and motor neurons important, right? We have to do all of this. And so what we're going to try to learn is how to structure and these sorts of things in part function. Okay, now, I don't really know this, but apparently it's true. There's somewhere north of 650 muscles in your body. My assumption is if you had anatomy here, Cindy made you learn all of them, right? And then would like dissect the cadaver and pose it in a weird way and pick out some weird sort of little tiny muscle someplace and be like, what is this? In those ways, okay? We have hundreds of muscles in the body, okay? Muscles are, and I apologize if you had me for 3813, you had me for health and fitness, but I think this is probably the best analogy that I can come up with. Muscles are made up of a series of increasingly smaller tubes, okay? They're just a tube, in a tube, inside of a tube, made up of tubes that are made up of smaller tubes, okay? I refer to muscles as they're basically a Russian nesting doll. Okay, you guys know what a Russian nesting doll is, right? You see one, it's like wooden or kind of cardboard, and it's here, and then you open it up, and inside of it is an exact replica, but it's a little bit smaller. And you open that one up, and it's smaller still. Okay, that's how we're going to look at and how we're going to try to interact with the anatomy of a skeletal muscle and a skeletal muscle fiber. Okay, things that are important. Unlike pretty much any other cell in your body, muscle fibers, because they're so big, they have many nuclei. Okay, if your muscles did not have many nuclei, it wouldn't work. Okay, you have to have these nuclei to keep your muscles healthy, to keep them working. You have to have all of these nuclei to get them to get bigger when we do resistance training. Okay, so I'll show you guys some pictures of that. The surface of the cell membrane of a muscle fiber we call the sarcolemma. Okay, sarco is, I don't know, it's Greek or Latin, it's one of those two, but it means muscle, right? We'll have a sarcolemma, it's the muscle membrane. There's something called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. It's just a big storage sac inside of a muscle, right? Sarco muscle. Okay, so we'll talk about this. As I said, as cells go, an individual fiber, okay, is one muscle cell. You can, if you would let me cut you open, you can see an individual muscle fiber with the naked eye. It's not that hard. Okay, they usually are a couple of centimeters long. So by cell size, muscle fibers are huge, 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 huge. Okay. Most cells we cannot see with the naked eye. Most of them you can't see with a magnifying glass. You've got to have a microscope. So fibers are giant, hence the need for many nuclei. Okay. Muscles are mostly water. Okay. See, many of you have your water jugs or bottles or whatever we call these things that will keep stuff cold for like a year and everything else. Okay, the muscles are about 75% water, they're about 20% protein, and then the rest of some ions and things they're going to go from that. Okay, so one of the things that we can do, this will become important later on in the course, if I want to manipulate your weight and make it go up or make it go down, I can try to do things to play with the water content in your muscles. Okay, anybody ever taken creatine? Okay. Couple of y'all. Okay, interesting. My denigrating of supplements is working. Okay. Okay. Take creatine. I took creatine when I was in high school. You know what it did? Drove water into my muscles. Right? Felt very bloated, all this. My muscles were visually bigger. They weren't actually bigger. They just drove more water in. Drive creatine phosphate into the muscles, the water will follow it, the muscles will sort of swell on. Okay. Conversely, we can have somebody, I don't know, do like 400 push-ups or something right now, and we'll drive water into the muscles that you're using, and you will look like you have bigger muscles. That's what all the bros are going to be doing today, right? They're going to bench press, they're going to be wearing their cut-off shirts, they're going to be cut out all the way down to here. right? It's fine, right? It's fine. When I was 20, I probably did the exact same thing. Okay. If I had muscles like I had when I was 20, I'd probably do the same thing. But, okay, all we're doing is manipulating water content. Okay. I can give you salt pills and it will suck the water out of your muscles. Right? You might want to Google something. Google like a bodybuilding competition. Okay. Bodybuilders will talk about looking real dry. And they put on a spray tan on like a football or something. What they do is they take water pills, or they take the salt pills, and it pulls the water out of their muscles and makes them look very, very defined. Okay, very defined. So I can manipulate this water content, and in doing so, I can change the appearance of my muscles. But you stop taking the salt pills, you drink some water, it goes back to normal. You stop taking the creatine, some of the creatine phosphate goes away, some of the water leaks back out of your muscles, right? Bros get a pump, and then in about an hour later, metabolites from everything that drew the water in, those are all gonna sort of diffuse back out, the water follows, they look like normal. Okay? So understanding again kind of what this all looks like is going to be really, really important. Okay, I'm sure you guys have seen all of this before, but here are our Russian nesting dogs. Whole muscle, okay? Think bicep, right? That was right. Bicep. There's several of them, right? I don't know which one's which, right? There's, y'all are not laughing at that. That's good because I know I'm tired. That's fine. So, whole muscle. Muscles are made up of these individual kind of larger tubes, okay, called fascicles. When you cut open a muscle and you cut through the external, what we're going to call fascia, which is actually sort of epimysium, okay, which is the connective tissue that holds all of these fascicles together. When you cut through that, these bundles that we see are fascicles. Fascicles are made up of bundles of individual muscle cells or individual muscle fibers, okay? And so then there's going to be connective tissue that surrounds those, okay? And then if we pull out basically one muscle fiber, and you look inside that fiber under a microscope, that fiber is made up of a bunch of smaller little tubes that are called myofibrils, okay? And you pull out one myofibril, and it's made up of these units called sarcomeres, and the sarcomeres are made up of, guess what? Little tubes that are protein, okay? Actin and myosin. And so it's at this level, it's at the protein level, okay, where force is generated and movement occurs. And then what happens is, if you get enough protein and enough actin and myosin being bound to each other, they will move, they pull, the sarcomere moves, that pulls on an adjacent sarcomere and another adjacent sarcomere, so the myofibril moves, that pulls on connective tissue, enough myofibrils move, that makes the muscle fiber move, so on and so forth, and we work our way up to, I pick up my Diet Dr. Pepper, I curl it up, and I drink it. In doing that small movement, there have been millions of interactions on the protein level, okay? Millions of actin and myosin interacting with each other, each of them generating these tiny, tiny, infinitesimally small, micrometer level movements. All of them together, though, allow this larger range of motion when we're going to. Okay? Does that make sense? It's really, really important to me that you guys understand every time you're doing something, what's actually happening is proteins are interacting with each other. And that's what is going to lead to sort of the whole muscle moving, pulling on a tendon, pulling on the bones, pulling a joint. It's going to be able to move. Okay? Typing, breathing, blinking. Some of you are writing and taking notes. All of that is requiring millions and millions of interactions on the protein level inside of muscle fiber. Okay? Anybody astounded yet that we can never do anything? When all of this happens by simple random chance, it's not, I mean, it is random, but it's not that simple. Okay? Your brain says, do this. And magically, in fractions of a second, there are hundreds of signals that lead to the correct proteins in the correct sarcomeres, in the correct myofibrils, in the correct muscle fibers, in the correct muscle, doing just what we want, just the right number to do whatever it is. Okay? Blows my mind. Every time. If anything ever. But it does. Really, really cool. Okay? You guys ever tried to pick up a box that you thought was going to be heavy and it was empty? Generate like way more force than what you need. Okay? That's the brain guessing at something. Every time you do something, your brain guesses based upon all of your past experience. I think we need this much force. It's really good at making those guesses. Okay. All right. So we talked about the connective tissue. I just want you all to appreciate that as we go down in levels, okay, each sort of, we've got our fascicles that are surrounded by the epimysium, okay? And we've got fibers that are surrounded by the paramysium, and we've got endomysium that's going to be around kind of down on the myofibril level. We have to have connective tissue, okay? We have to. All of this connective tissue runs back together and makes a tendon, okay? It's elastic, it's stretchy, it holds things together, but it's also like a rubber band. It's really, really good at transmitting force. Without the connective tissue, we cannot move one small fiber and then get a whole muscle to be able to contract. Okay. We have to have this connective tissue to transmit the force. And then once you've done it and you've stretched it or you've shortened it, then the connective tissue is elastic and it wants to go back to its regular confirmation. Okay? So without all of that, things don't work right. Okay, so talked about this. Let's look at an individual muscle fiber. Okay, I'm sure all of this is reviewed for you guys. We're going to hit some of the high points on the organelles and structures inside of a fiber that I think are going to be really, really important. And we're going to cover these. I need you to know, what are they, where are they located, and what is their primary function, okay? Because what we're going to see next week probably is that if these things don't work correctly, if something happens to them, we don't get force. You cannot get a muscle to be able to contract, okay? All right, so this is the muscle fiber. The whole structure is a muscle fiber, all right? The sarcolemma is the membrane, cell membrane of the muscle fiber. It surrounds the entire thing. The sarcolemma looks like most other cell membranes. It's a lipid or a phospholipid bilayer, okay? It's going to have receptors on it. It's going to have proteins interspersed all through it, okay? And very, very importantly, the sarcolemma is what we call excitable, okay? Excitable. That means it can generate an action potential. We'll come back to that, talk about that much more so in a couple of lectures, okay? But that's really, really important. Just on the inside of the sarcolemma is something called, there's a little bit on the outside too, called the basement membrane. Okay, the basement membrane. The basement membrane is a structural component that houses various proteins and things that works like scaffolding for a fiber, right? Or it's the studs in the wall that hold the room up, that hold the walls together, and everything else. Okay, we are learning more and more about the basement membrane pretty much every day. It actually turns out it's way more important than we ever used to think it was. Okay, it's going to have various proteins and things that are going to be interspersed in it, some enzymes that are going to be in it, and actually having a good intact basement membrane is really, really key, not just for the structure and holding the muscle together, but also for proper physiological function. Okay. We're not going to get into very much of what that is, but if you move on in this field and those kinds of things, we're learning more and more about the basement. Okay. The next one is a thing called a transverse tubule or a T tubule. Okay? What I want you guys to do is put your arm out like so. Okay? Take your finger and I want you to press on your arm. And imagine that your arm is a muscle fiber. Okay? One muscle fiber, and your skin is basically the sarcolemma. And if you could essentially press with your finger and shove some of that skin down inside into your arm, that would create a T tube. Okay? So the muscle fiber runs like this, it is transverse to it, and it presses basically and has a hole on the outside, so it's a tube that then runs down and will be able to bring things from the surface down into the inside of that muscle fiber, down into that tube. Okay? The inside of a T tubule is a lipid bilayer. The inside is just an extension of the sarcolemma. This is also really, really important. It's really important. Because, pick somebody and hit that one. I can have somebody stand up and just like hold your backpack out like this, and just hold your arms out. And in a couple of minutes, you're going to start getting wobbly. You're going to have some fatigue that's going to get induced. Part of what's happening with that fatigue, and part of one of the reasons that we lose an ability to generate force, is a problem in these T tubules. Okay, we lose our ability to transmit action potentials through the T tubules, and therefore we cannot get our nervous system signal down into our muscle. Talk about that later on in the class. That's why T tubules are so important. T tubules run adjacent to and are in essence connected to this network, this kind of dark, kind of crimson, kind of maroon network of what's basically a storage sac called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Lots of space inside a muscle fiber is taken up by sarcoplasmic reticulum. What's the thing that's inside the sarcoplasmic reticulum? What things are fun? One of my favorites. What's inside the sarcoplasmic reticulum? Here today. Oh, wait. Yeah, calcium. Very good. Perfect. You guys know that people abhor uncomfortable silences. So they teach us. You ever go to a pedagogy class and kind of teach, they're like, use silence to your advantage. Like just ask a question and just sit here and wait. Some of you will be so uncomfortable that you will feel the need. Feel the need to fill the silence with your voice. You're like, oh, this is weird. This is weird. I must talk. I must talk. Okay. So anyway, calcium. Very good. Sarcoplasmic reticulum stores calcium. Without calcium, no muscle contractions. Okay? No muscle contractions. That's going to be really, really important. These are mitochondria. Okay? Please don't call the mitochondria the powerhouse of the cell. It makes me skinnish. Okay? Mitochondria are what were likely at one point in time single-celled organisms that basically got taken up into other cells. Okay, those mitochondria, they have their own DNA. You guys know that? They have DNA that's separate from all of the rest of the DNA in your body. They came from your mom. Okay, so if you've got a lot of mitochondria, which means you can make a lot of ATP via aerobic metabolism, thank your mom. Okay? People that are good distance runners probably got that from their mom. If you're not a good distance runner, you probably also got that from your mom too. Okay? Mitochondria seem to get passed along sort of genetically from the maternal side. We'll get into mitochondria during metabolism, but they are these small organelles. They also have several lipid bilayers and membranes inside of them, but the primary purpose of the mitochondria is to make ATP using a process called oxidative phosphorylation. We'll get into all of it. Okay. You can manipulate how many mitochondria you have in the muscle. Okay. This purple structure out here on the outside of the cell, this is the nucleus. Okay. That location may seem weird to you. In most cells, the nucleus is in the middle. We're kind of roughly in the middle. In skeletal muscle, they're on the outside. On the outside. Okay. That is partially so it doesn't occupy space inside where we could actually put protein, sarcoplasmic reticulum, and T-tubules or mitochondria. We don't want the nucleus taking up space that can be occupied by things that we actually need for that muscle cell to function. You see one in this picture here. There would actually be a second one here, and they would be interspersed kind of all along and then put that muscle fiber. The last thing that's on here is something called a satellite cell. Let's see if I have a picture in the next slide. I think I do, of a satellite cell. Talk about these things. Mitochondria. There we go. Okay. Satellite cell. Satellite cells are stem cells. They're a stem cell. Who knows what stem cells are? Very controversial. What's a stem cell?
Can't they like turn into any other cell pretty much?
That's correct. Okay. Some stem cells. The magic of stem cells. Why research into stem cells is so promising. Is stem cells are cells that, if we give them the right input, they're basically precursor cells. We can tell them to become any kind of cell that we want in your body. Okay. So in theory, if you have an uncommitted stem cell, you could tell it become a kidney, become a liver, become a neuron, whatever that's going to be. Okay. That's an incredibly complicated process to get it to do all of that and get it to commit and then grow and grow and grow and grow. Okay. But that means one of the promising things about all of it, we can make it work. Then if you're a type 1 diabetic, I can just grow you a new pancreas. Okay. Or I can just grow you new beta cells for your pancreas to be integrated into what you have. Rescue your ability to make this. You have a spinal cord injury. And I can inject stem cells and make them get committed to become neurons. You can fix your spinal cord injury. Okay. So that's the sort of usefulness of a stem cell. A satellite cell is a muscle-specific stem cell. Okay. And so what that means is it's already moved its way along and kind of become committed to all it will be able to become at some point is a new muscle cell or a new muscle fiber. Okay. But you have these satellite cells all along your muscle fibers. And they're really, really important for repairing a fiber if it gets damaged. And we know they're really important for helping us to make those muscle fibers grow. Okay. They will take, as far as I know, they've not ever done this in a human, but I can take a mouse or a rat or something, and I can zap it with radiation, and I can knock out the ability of its satellite cells to do anything. Then you have it exercise, or you have it exercise and you give it testosterone. Its muscles don't get any bigger. Okay. So things like that are going to be really interesting and problematic for some folks. So it's hard under a microscope to tell a satellite cell from a nuclei. They are going to exist on the outside. You've got to look at it and you'll notice that the nuclei sort of are just under the membrane, where satellite cells have this sort of double protective membrane around them. That part doesn't really matter to you all at this point in time. We'll talk much more about satellite cells, how we activate them, what are the proper signals that are going to go on with all of this, how we use them to repair injured, damaged skeletal muscle, and how we use them to hopefully grow muscles to kind of, if you wanted to, with resistant training. Okay? All right. Let me back up and just make sure as we went through these other things that I didn't miss anything that was really, really important. Okay. So one thing that I do want you guys to know, and you're not responsible for this, you're not going to have to draw this or anything else, but here is basement membrane stuff. You guys can see all of this complicated stuff, right? That is going on with everything else. Here's the sarcolemma, right? This is stuff on the outside, this is stuff on the inside. An important thing you may have heard of in the basement membrane, there's a protein called dystrophin. Okay, you guys heard of there's a disease called muscular dystrophy. Okay, if you have muscular dystrophy, your dystrophin does not work correctly. It doesn't bind, it's misshapen, and therefore it cannot form this proper sort of scaffold here. And so if you have muscular dystrophy, your muscles get damaged really, really easily, they waste away really easily and those kinds of things. So that's what's going on there. There's all of this sort of extracellular side of things, and then this intracellular side, a whole bunch of stuff, and we're figuring out how important all of this really and truly is for proper function. But you don't have to know anything beyond sort of just generally what the basement membrane is. Okay. I want to mention one thing here. Okay. This location where each tubule comes into close contact with the sarcoplasmic reticulum right here. This is called a terminal cisternae. Okay. Also sometimes referred to as a triad. Okay. Triad means three. Don't worry about sort of what the three things are, but the end on the sarcoplasmic reticulum side is technically the terminal cisternae. That's where most of the calcium is. The terminal cisternae is what comes into contact with the T-tubule, and we're going to transmit a signal across those two things in order to get calcium to be released. So if you see that term, that's what it is. That's what it's referring to. Okay. A last couple of things that I want you all to know in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, okay? And this is a place where the structure is actually quite important because these structures help us to function. What you see here at the top, this is the T-tubule, okay? This is the T-tubule. This is the sarcoplasmic reticulum right here, okay? There are two receptors that I want you all to know the names. The first one is on the T-tubule side. It's called the dihydropyridine receptor. Dihydropyridine, or DHP. Okay. DHP receptor in the T-tubule is sensitive to voltage, which means as an active potential moves through the T-tubule, it will activate the DHP receptor. Okay. DHP is important because this is the thing that links the T-tubule to the sarcoplasmic reticulum, functionally at least. Okay. On the sarcoplasmic reticulum, facing the DHP receptor is this receptor right here called the ryanodine receptor, the RYR receptor. Okay. Ryanodine is basically like a plug. Okay. It's like a cork in a wine bottle, in essence. If the wine bottle was the sarcoplasmic reticulum. What happens is DHP gets activated, and DHP tells the ryanodine receptor to basically pull the cork out of the bottle. Okay? We uncork the sarcoplasmic reticulum. That allows calcium to leave the sarcoplasmic reticulum and move into the cytosol or the cytoplasm of that muscle. Okay? This will become really important and hopefully make more sense to you guys probably on Monday of next week when we talk about the physiological processes of how we get from a signal in the brain to get calcium to be released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum so that we can get active myosin to bind. Okay? So that's DHP and ryanodine. And then another sort of, it's not a receptor, but it's actually an enzyme that exists on the sarcoplasmic reticulum is this. Okay, it's noted here, it's called SERCA. What SERCA is an enzyme called the calcium ATPase. SERCA is a vacuum cleaner. Okay, the job of SERCA is to pull calcium from the inside of that muscle fiber back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay, and it does that by pumping it in by catalyzing ATP, so we use energy. Okay, we use this calcium ATPase to pull calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, so you can have another muscle contraction. You would spend, I don't know, depending upon how active you are, like 10% of your daily energy expenditure comes from running the circuit pump. Okay. A third of all the energy you use every day comes from running circa and the sodium potassium pump to redo ionic gradients in neurons and the sarcolemma and those things. So we use a tremendous amount of energy. Okay. That's what's going on here at the T-tubule and the sarcoplasmic. Questions about that? No. Do we need to stand up and do some jumping jacks? Yeah? Okay. Everybody stand up. Come on. When class was longer, we got to take a text break or something. You guys are here, move around a little bit, do some squats. I don't know, a little bit of deadlifting, whatever you want to do. Just kind of wiggle about a little, okay? Right? Tell your neighbor what you did yesterday. Anybody have a fun weekend you want to share with us? Oh. Doing better? Maybe running for your coffee machine on Wednesday? Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right, you guys can sit back down. Okay. All right. So our next kind of big structure to talk about is what's called a sarcomere. Okay. A sarcomere is in many ways the single functional unit of skeletal muscle. This is the place where movement occurs and the place where force is generated. Okay. And so this is a sarcomere. Okay. This edge over here and the edge on the other side is called a Z-line, right? Because it's zigzag. Okay. The Z-lines are made up of, again, proteins that are going to serve as scaffolding. Okay. And then inside of the sarcomere are going to be these filaments. We've got the little ones that are here that are sort of wound around like a rope on themselves, made up of these small little spheres. These are called thin filaments, and they are made up of individual molecules of actin. Okay, actin. These here, okay, have the little head region that protrudes. These are called thick filaments, and they're made up of the protein myosin. Okay. When you see a sarcomere under a microscope, and I think I have some pictures, you will see why they call them thick and thin filaments. Okay. When you see them, the myosin filaments look very dark and much thicker. They look a little bit fuzzy. The actin filaments look very thick. And so it's organized in this way so that we can get actin molecules cram as much actin and as much myosin together in a small area as possible, okay? So that we can create as many places as possible for these myosin heads to be able to attach to actin, form what we call a cross bridge, and generate force, okay? That's the purpose of a sarcomere. Here's an electron micrograph of a sarcomere, okay? So what you can see here basically is thick filaments, and there's some kind of thin filaments. This one's not a great kind of picture, but that's what's going on. Okay, we have these alternating things. This one looks a little bit better. Okay, so here you can see this is the Z line, This is a Z line, right? And you will note out here in the middle, you can see some of our actin filaments, and you can see where all of this kind of overlap of myosin and actin is going to be together when we start sort of thing. I'm not going to make you guys learn what the I band is, what the A band is. I do want you to know about the Z line, okay? Or the M or the H zone or band. Okay, again, there is a thing called Google. You can look these things up. It's not that important. Okay, I do want you to know what they're made up of and what their kind of three-dimensional arrangement is with each other, which we will see in the coming slides. Okay. Okay. So this is sort of one way to look at a sarcomere. Is this. Okay, this is going to come down to, you can see two individual thin filaments and one thick filament, and you can see the myosin heads all protruding off in those ways. But if you turn this towards you guys, when you look down the end at it, it looks like this. Okay, see this, each one of the pink molecules on here, the pink circles, is a thick filament. It's a myosin filament. And you will note then that around that myosin, there's going to be this hexagon arrangement of 6 actin filaments. And so three-dimensionally in space, by having that hexagon arrangement, and then you can note by doing all of that, right, that more than one myosin filament can bind to the same actin filament. What we're going to do is create a situation where we can pack as many actin and myosin filaments together to maximize the ability of myosin to attach to actin as possible in as small an area as we can possibly get. Okay? That's the point here. That's going to be the point. Because it's at this level, it's at the interactions of these proteins where we get movement and we get force reduction. Okay? Okay. We'll talk about troponin and tropomyosin in a minute. Just want to see, nope, do I not have a better picture? Here we go. Let me do this and then we'll back up and we'll talk about what the myosin itself looks like. Okay. Here is an actin molecule, the little sphere. This is an actin filament. Okay. A thin filament is many molecules of actin hooked next to each other into two chains that are sort of wound around you. Okay? Now, on the picture, the kind of tan area is going to denote the place on the active molecule that we're going to call a binding site. This is where myosin can connect to actin. So, if that site was always available, myosin would always want to bind to actin. Okay, it's always going to want to bind to actin. If that happened, you'd spend all of your life in one big muscle cramp. Okay, every muscle in your body would be contracting all the time. You'd just be in a big cramp whenever you want. Okay, so the normal resting state for this is to block the binding site on the actin molecule with another protein called tropomyosin. Okay, so it looks like this. Here's my thin filament. Here's tropomyosin that runs along the length of that filament, and it lays like a rope in the binding site. Tropomyosin is all the little plugs we put in all the electrical outlets in my house to kid-proof the house. Okay, so as much as it wants, myosin can try to bind, but it can't get to the binding site because of tropomyosin. I've already shown you guys, though, that whenever you want, you can contract your muscles. So we have to have a way to move the tropomyosin out of the way and allow myosin to bind, but only when we want. Okay? And we're going to use another protein to do this, and that protein is called troponin. Troponin. This is troponin right here. Okay? Troponin has multiple subunits. You don't have to know all the subunits, but I want to expose you to it, okay? But troponin is going to sit at various different points along the myosin or the actin filament. Sorry. Troponin has one subunit, the C subunit that binds calcium. Okay, it then also has the T subunit that's going to kind of sit and help it bind to the filament, and the I subunit that's going to sit also going to kind of help it connect to the tropomines. So when we want to contract our muscles, you release calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, it binds on the troponin, and the troponin then changes its shape. Okay, the troponin twists and moves, and as it does so, because it's connected to the tropomyosin, it pulls the tropomyosin away from the binding site. Now myosin is like, yay, the door's open, here I come. Okay, and it grabs onto the actin, it forms a cross bridge, and we can get a muscle. Okay. So we often refer to tropomyosin and troponin as regulatory proteins. Regulatory proteins. They regulate the ability of myosin and actin to bind together. Okay? And because our natural resting state is to have tropomyosin sit in the binding site, your muscles normally exist as relaxed. Okay? And that is why understanding how we get calcium out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum so it can bind to troponin and open the binding site so that you can have myosin binding with force production is such an important process. Okay. Why that all is such an important process. Okay. When you back up, I apologize, I forgot that this was in here. Let me show you a couple of things about myosin. Okay. We'll probably get to the beginnings of this today. We'll cover it more on Wednesday. Here's a thick filament. Okay. Here's a thick filament. What we're going to say basically is there is this tail region of a myosin molecule, and then there's a hinge, and then there is the head region that's going to be there. To make a thick filament, there's all of these tail regions that basically wind themselves around each other. Okay. The tail regions are made up of something that we call light muromyosin. Okay. This is going to get really confusing, and I apologize if this is sort of the way they termed it. Okay. The tail regions are light muromyosin. The hinge and the head region are made up of something that we call heavy muromyosin. Okay. Heavy muromyosin. And so if you look specifically at the head region, there's going to be these little differing kind of structural parts that are going to go on in the myosin head. And I show you guys this because these regions in the myosin head differ between different muscle fiber types. Okay? This is what's going to make something a fast twitch muscle or a slow twitch muscle or a slow twitch fiber or a fast twitch fiber. It's going to have a difference and play a difference in how quickly that fiber can contract and generate force, as well as how much force it can generate. Okay, so, and here's where it's confusing. This is the head region. We call this heavy muromyosin. In the head region, okay, these large globular proteins that you see here that make up this myosin, these are called heavy chains. Okay, this is the heavy chain, sometimes referred to as the myosin MHC, myosin heavy chain. These heavy chains will differ between different muscle fiber types. Okay, then at the sort of inside of the head region, there's the actin binding sites there and there, but then there are these three other types of little globular proteins here, and those are called light chains. Light denoting they have a molecular weight that is smaller. They're smaller molecules than the heavy chain. Okay? So there's three different light chains. There's the heavy chain, there's the binding site, and then right here by the binding site is an enzyme. Here, here. And that enzyme is called the myosin ATPase. Okay? the myosin ATPase. When you contract your muscle, it increases your metabolic rate and it uses energy. Most of that increased energy is coming from the activity of that particular enzyme. That enzyme plays a very, very key role in breaking ATP into ADP and inorganic phosphate that lets the cross bridge release itself, so it lets the myosin release from actin, and it's going to help drive that myosin going back into its original conformational state so we can contract again and again. Okay? Heavy chains differ, ATPase enzyme activity differs between muscle fiber types. That's why I want to show you guys how all of this works. Again, structure is going to impart function. Okay? Any of you that are really fast runners or you can jump really high probably have more of what we would call a fast twitch heavy chain and a fast twitch myosin ATPase here. Okay? That ATPase is wildly inefficient though. If you're a really fast runner, you're probably not great at doing endurance things because it blows through so much ATP so quickly that it's hard for you to keep up with that amount of production. Okay? If you're more like me, you're a little bit more of an endurance person and you can't jump to save your life, I have more slow twitch myosin heavy chain and more slow twitch myosin ATPase. And so I cannot generate force twice fast, okay? But my ATPase is way more efficient. All right, it's way more efficient. So that will let me run for longer distances or cycle for longer distances. Okay, hit all of those. All right, this is the formation of a cross bridge. Okay, thin filament, actin filament, right? Tropomyosin, troponin, right? Myosin tail. Well, this is probably hinge region, myosin head. Okay. When everything moves and this binds, and the myosin head binds onto the actin, that forms a structure called a cross bridge. Okay, called a cross bridge. Right now, once it has bound, now we get force production. Okay, all force production comes from myosin binding to actin. Okay, in a very general sense, if you're stronger than your neighbor, you can form more cross bridges than they can. Why are bigger muscles generally stronger than smaller muscles? They have more actin and myosin, they can form more cross bridges. Okay? Right here, what happens after this thing binds and generates force? Determines the type of contraction. It determines the energy cost of the contraction. It determines if any movement happens at all. Okay? So this cross bridge and its ability to be formed is the key event in all movement. Okay? All movement. So in some ways, that event is the key event in all of exercise physiology. How we get the right number of those in the right muscles at just the right time to generate just the right amount of force to do whatever we want is what drives all of exercise physiology. Okay. Once it binds, assuming there are enough of them that it can generate enough force to move whatever external load exists on that muscle or at that joint, the myosin head will tilt, okay? It will bind and it will tilt this direction, okay? If it's on this side of the sarcomere, it's going to pull toward the inside. If it's on this side of the sarcomere, it's going to pull that way. As it tilts, we call that a power stroke, okay? We call that a power stroke. So you do a curl like this. As you curl up, what we are getting is thousands and thousands and thousands of power strokes in the bicep muscle that are shortening those muscle fibers that are allowing me to pull my arm up. Okay? Each power stroke moves the sarcomere just a few micrometers. Just a very, very few micrometers. Okay, that's going to be a big thing. That's what we're going to talk about. And we'll talk about the cross-bridge cycle a little bit later on. A couple of other things that I want to point out in our last few minutes today. I want to point out some other proteins that exist in muscles. Most of these exist in the sarcomere. Okay, there's a protein called nebulin that's going to help on our thin filaments hold things together. There are things at the Z line called desmin and alpha actinin. They're going to provide some scaffolding on those levels. And then probably the coolest one is there's this giant protein called titin. Titin is going to connect at the Z line. It's going to connect us into our individual filaments as well. Okay. And it helps to keep the thick filaments centered. Titin is very elastic. Okay. So it will give us some resistance to stretching. We also now know, for the longest time we didn't, and I'm surprised this has not won a Nobel Prize yet, that for the longest time we thought all force production in muscle came from myelin. We now know that it can also generate force all by itself. It provides structure, it provides elasticity, but it can also contract and generate force all by itself. Okay. I saw a video of this at a conference about 10 years ago. It absolutely blew my mind. Every textbook you ever read never talks about this, right? Like this is a really, really cool thing. It was discovered by some folks at Toronto, University of Toronto. Depending on the name of things, a university in Toronto. It's really, really cool. Okay. So I bring that up. You guys see things. You can see some things about Titan coming down in the next few years. Okay, we got a couple of minutes left. We did this. Okay, we got cross-bridge cycle. Probably not where I want to put it. Talk about biopsy. Yeah. Okay, there's no reason for us. We can't get through any of this. So in just a couple of minutes. So we'll stop here. Okay. On Wednesday, provided I can figure out how to use Canvas, on Wednesday, we'll have a full day. So we got ready for today. We're going to look at your other kinds of new things. We'll start with the cross-bridge cycle, then we'll do muscle fiber types, and we'll start talking about it. All right, very good. Just go on Wednesday.